hail at lower levels. And many southern and western areas staying dry. Where we've got clear skies, there'll be fairly widespread frost over southwest Scotland. The cloud helping to keep temperatures up a little bit for much of England and Wales, but still some frost likely in the countryside. Many areas across the south will see the showers fading this evening, and that'll lead to a dry start tomorrow. Quite cloudy, but some sunshine over South Wales and southwest England, where we've got these showers coming in across northern England. Potential for things to be a bit icy for the morning commute, so just bear that in mind. The showers feeding in close to the coast will be of rain, but inland some sleet and a bit of hill snow possible. Good part of Scotland starting dry, but it will be starting cold and frosty for many, but quite a bit of sunshine through the central belt and for Belfast too. We'll see some sunny spells for England and Wales, but generally the cloud increasing as we see more showers drifting south through the day, developing inland over northern England, the Midlands, even southern counties of England. Again, chiefly of rain, but some sleet and hail certainly possible, even at lower levels. Feeling cold, 6 to 7 Celsius. Out on that breeze on the east coast, feels even colder. Elsewhere, maybe 9 or 10. Friday is a similar day, so we start with frost where we've had the clear skies. Could again be quite icy in the morning as we see these showers then developing through the day. Again, chiefly of rain, but some sleet and hail is possible in places. Becoming largely dry though through the weekend with some sunny spells, but always staying on the chilly side. Bye for now.
We'll see a cold snap, which will quickly develop into a warm front. Boxed Boiler Repairs, sponsors of weather on GB News.
You could have £17,777 in tax-free cash to play with this spring. Cash to spend on anything you like. And if that wasn't enough, we're also going to give you not one, but 2 sought-after designer watches and the latest Mulberry handbag. How would winning that sound? For a chance to win the cash, 2 watches and a designer bag, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus 1 standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. Call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge, or post your name and number to GB12 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrants must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 4th of April. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Mornings don't have to be tiresome, especially if you have the right company.
Wake up to news as it happens, opinion and debate, and of course, a little bit of entertainment too.
Because when the kettle's on, we're on.
That's Breakfast on GB News, a show worth waking up for.
Every morning from 6 a.m.
Only on the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We'll spread the news, you spread the word.
Hi, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and my show is your opportunity to cut through all the noise and dive in headfirst to some robust debates. Ideas clash.
Situation,
no,
isn't it? Because the failure is...
You're deliberately avoiding my point. Nothing's held back.
And if you think this is the end of it, wait for more.
And we do not shy away from the difficult stuff. Sometimes I want to shake people and say, if only you understood. So join me on Jubes & Co. weeknights at 6 p.m, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently. It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it? It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good evening, everybody. You're watching State of the Nation tonight on GB News with me, Matt Goodwin, the show that speaks up for you, the forgotten majority. On tonight's show, As Rupert Lowe is suspended from the Reform Party, tonight I'm going to reveal why the right in British politics must be united if it wants any hope of bringing Britain back from the brink. How did the United Kingdom become the social housing provider of the world? It's a good question. The internet has exploded over the last few days over the proportion of social housing that is occupied by people who were not born in the UK. Donald Trump's trade war has well and truly begun as the EU retaliates with more than £20 billion worth of tariffs. But what does this mean for the UK? And finally, a GB News exclusive tonight. Stephen Edgington's new documentary has revealed how kebab shops and halal butchers have sponsored hundreds of skilled visas right here in Britain. That's State of the Nation tonight with me, Matt Goodwin, starts now. Now, I'll be joined tonight by my top panel, columnist and former MEP Patrick O'Flynn and former Labour advisor Paul Richards. As ever, let me know your views tonight at gbnews.com/your say and hit me up on X at GoodwinMJ. But now it's time for the News Bulletin with Katie Bowen.
Matt, thank you very much. Your top stories at 8 o'clock. President Trump has said that the US can put pressure on Russia to accept that 30-day ceasefire deal with Ukraine, although the president added he hoped that wouldn't be necessary. Speaking during a meeting with the Irish Taoiseach, the president went on to add that, quote, there are things you could do in a financial sense that would be bad for Russia, and that NATO can be the force for good. The president's latest comments come as Defence Secretary John Healey met with counterparts from France, Germany, Poland and Italy in Paris today for more talks on Ukraine. President Zelensky hailed what he called constructive talks and says he wants to use a potential 30-day ceasefire as a chance to draft a permanent peace plan which could include security guarantees. The European Union was set up to take advantage of the US. That's what President Trump said as he was discussing his decision to impose tariffs on steel and aluminium imports. President Trump went on to say, also during that meeting with the Taoiseach, that he will respond to the EU's counter-tariffs, adding that there will be very little flexibility on tariffs when they come in. Sir Keir Starmer has said that the UK will keep all options on the table to respond, and the Business Secretary described President Trump's decision to impose those global tariffs as disappointing. The UK steel industry has also warned that the tariffs couldn't come at a worse time. Canada and the European Union have also announced retaliatory tariffs. President Trump set out his response earlier.
The European Union treats us very badly. They have for years. And as you know, we're going to be doing reciprocal tariffs. So whatever they charge us, we're charging them. And so I don't know why people get upset about that, because there's nothing more fair than that. There are some cases where they're a little beyond reciprocal because, you know, we've been abused for a long time as a country. We have been abused really for a long time, and we will be abused no longer.
And just briefly, the Secretary of State for Business and Trade, Jonathan Reynolds, has corrected the record in Parliament tonight over his previous employment. Mr. Reynolds clarified that he was a trainee solicitor and he had made an inadvertent error during a debate in 2014 on high-speed rail. Let's bring you that statement in full.
Madam Deputy Speaker, on a point of order. It has come to my attention that in a speech I gave on the 28th of April 2014, recorded in column 614 of Hansard on the subject of high-speed rail, I made a reference to my experience of using our local transport system in Greater Manchester when I worked as a solicitor in Manchester city centre. I should have made clear that specifically, Madam Deputy Speaker, that was a reference at the time to being a trainee solicitor. This was an inadvertent error, and although this speech was over a decade ago, as it has been brought to my attention, I would like to formally correct the record, and I seek your advice on doing so.
Those are the latest GB News headlines. Now let's go back to Matt.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Welcome back tonight to State of the Nation with me, Matt Goodwin. Now, the Reform UK row has moved far beyond allegations and recriminations between the party and Rupert Lowe. It has now evolved into a dispute over ideology. Those of the so-called online right, an amorphous online subculture of right-wingers who support policies like remigration, the repatriation of migrants back to their countries of origin, who broadly support Rupert Lowe in this debate, are effectively claiming that Nigel Farage lacks ideological purity and that the Reform Party have become too soft on these cultural issues. While I don't want to be drawn into the personal dispute between Nigel Farage and Rupert Lowe, which I know that many Reform voters, members and activists out there will find deeply unfortunate and regrettable, I do want to say a few things about this ideological rift, because I think that more than a few people out there might be losing touch with political reality. What some people online are suddenly and conveniently forgetting is that at the last general election in 2024, Nigel Farage and the Reform Party were the only political party in Britain to call for the immediate deportation of dual nationals who had been convicted of raping and sexually assaulting British children. A policy, by the way, that I advocated before the general election on my newsletter. Nobody else called for this, only the Reform Party called for it at the last election. Furthermore, the idea that Nigel Farage does not care about the rape gangs is for the birds. In reality, from as early as 2011 and 2012, Nigel Farage was the only mainstream politician willing to discuss this issue directly, which he did in northern towns like Oldham and Rotherham, drawing attention to it on billboards. I know because I was there at the time. Until Mr. Farage started to talk openly about it, the rape gangs were really only discussed at the time by the likes of the pro-remigration British National Party, or the BNP, which polled just 3% of the national vote at its peak, and Tommy Robinson's English Defence League. Tommy Robinson himself polled only 2% of the vote at European Parliament elections in 2019, losing his deposit at the same time. Both of those movements alienated the vast majority of hard-working, tax-paying, law-abiding British people in this country who desperately and urgently want action on these issues. They want an end to mass uncontrolled immigration. They want the system to be more responsive and more representative of ordinary people, but they also reject racism and violence. Nigel Farage, in sharp contrast, can both campaign on those issues and, as we've seen in 2014 and 2019, can also win nationwide elections. The point is that Reform UK has been leading in the national polls today. In fact, today, in another poll from More in Common, we see that Reform are leading the polls alongside the Labour Party, with Reform being joint first. There is a serious possibility in this country of a political revolution under Nigel Farage's leadership of the Reform Party. And those who are increasingly seduced by the erroneous idea that Reform UK is selling out really, I think, need to ask themselves a fundamental question. Do they want electoral irrelevance, or do they want political power? Do they want the chance to genuinely change the direction of this country? As always, let me know your views at gbnews.com/yoursay, or meet me on X at GoodwinMJ. But I'm joined tonight by polling researcher at More in Common, Chris Anus, as well as my panel, columnist and former MEP Patrick O'Flynn and former Labour advisor Paul Richards. Chris, let me start with you. There is this big debate going on online about the future of Reform. There are those who say, look, Reform has gone too soft, it needs to embrace these policies like remigration and the sort of forced return, if you like, of migrants outside of the UK. And then there are others who say, actually, look, Reform is trying to reach out to this broader coalition. It has to get to 32% if it wants to win a majority at the next election. Just tell us a bit about where you think the country is based on your polling at More in Common.
Yeah, I think Reform's got an important challenge to address. On the one hand, it has been highlighting issues that are important to the public, like reducing immigration and stuff like that. But what is really important is that Reform leaders and advisors do properly understand what their voters are like. So you touched on it in some of the more radical nature of the online supporters. But if we look at the riots back in the summer, we found actually that there was really only a quarter of the Reform voters back then who supported the more radical elements of those rioting. The belief that people should be ashamed that Britain's a multi-ethnic society. And most importantly, Reform's vote support has grown significantly since the last election. And amongst the new voters, those who didn't vote Reform last time but now say they support the party, they're actually more moderate than those who vote Reform in July. So, for example, whilst those who voted Reform in July have a positive view of Tommy Robinson, those who have now come to Reform actually have a net negative view.
So we've seen Reform go from 14% of the general election last July to around, I think you've got them on 25% today, so already a growth of about 11 points. They need to get to about 32% to win a majority. What do you say to people out there who suggest that actually Reform need to become more radical in order to get to that 32%? They need to, for example, embrace policies like remigration and say, actually, if you are an immigrant in Britain, you should be encouraged to go home, or if you're even a British national, but you arrived in Britain in recent years, you should be deported. What do you say to those people?
I think, two things. So first of all, the British public do have concerns about the levels of immigration, but they reject racism on the whole, and it's only a small minority who don't. So I think, leaning into some of those perhaps more controversial policies would really create some challenges. And I think the thing about Reform is that Reform have really tapped into a dissatisfaction with politics. That's more about, that underlying feeling that things aren't working in Britain anymore. That's what's, done well, and that's the opinion shared by not just current Reform voters, but potentially some more Reform voters. Yeah. So tapping into that is where I'd say they'd be best.
Thanks. Patrick O'Flynn, there is a philosophical civil war unfolding here. It's not just about the personality disputes between Rupert Lowe and Nigel Farage. I mean, how do you see this unfolding in the weeks to come?
Well, I think personally that the British public opinion as a whole has moved to the right quite markedly, even in the last 7 or 8 months, on immigration issues. I think there is support for deportations and the demand for deportations of foreign national criminals, absolutely, of illegal immigrants, absolutely. And the Tories have sort of moved into this area of pushing to change the rules on indefinite leave to remain. So, for instance, some of the Boris wave, when their visas run out, they leave rather than stay for good. So all that is evidence that there has been some hardening. But I think the difference between some hardening and what Rupert Lowe has been going around the country calling for, including, to look at a post he put on X today, the removal of entire communities. He had one phrase, if that's what it takes. I think that it risks, to be frank, turning Reform's brand into some kind of Pakistanis out of Britain, very 1970s, 3% Tommy Robinson type of street politics, even though that's not Rupert Lowe's style. So I can quite see why Nigel Farage and the Reform leadership thought that maybe the Elon Musk endorsement had gone to Rupert Lowe's head. Elon Musk's #1 issue about British politics has been the Pakistani heritage rape gangs, and that Rupert Lowe was upping the ante. Now, I think personally that Nigel has not quite filled this more sceptical view on immigration, has not quite filled that opinion gap with any ideas himself to do with radical reform of asylum, whatever it might be. But I also think that he's quite right to understand that the British public are fair-minded. They know that a multiracial society is what we've got, and many people from many ethnic backgrounds make a huge contribution, and they won't want to be associated with this word remigration, which feels quite threatening, I would say, to people from all kinds of ethnic minority backgrounds.
Paul Richards, Labour advisor, I mean, all of this is great news for Labour, isn't it? You've got a divided right, not only between the Conservatives and Reform, but now you appear to have a divide within Reform versus Reform.
Your word purity, I thought, was a telling one in your monologue earlier, Matt, because I think we've seen this on the left where, it reminds me a little bit of the Trotskyists, where you would get 4 Trots in a room, you'd get 5 factions within half an hour. And it's true, it seems to be replicated on the right, where they are dividing like amoeba on these points of purity of policy. And it's incredibly damaging to any political movement, but it creates heretics, and it creates this sort of, this ever more extreme discourse and language. And there only are 5 Reform MPs. It's not like it's a massive block, and now they're down to 4. A by-election coming up. We'll see what happens there. But it's not good news for Reform. And I'm afraid, being a zero-sum game, it means it is good news for Labour.
Yeah, I mean, Chris, let me just quickly bring you up on this point about deportations, because I was looking at the polling, I wrote about it today, that if you actually look at support for deporting immigrants who have convicted crimes, who have only just come to the country, who are adults, for example, there's pretty strong support for that, looking at some of the YouGov polling. But if you then ask people, well, what if these people have been here for most of their lives? Support completely collapses. And if you say, well, what if they convicted minor crimes? There's only about 15% of people who say, yeah, OK, well, I'd be up for deporting these people who have been in the UK for much of their lives and who have committed minor crimes. Now, you take away the criminal aspect, I think support is even lower for this idea of deportation. So, I mean, there's a risk, isn't there, here for Reform, that they get sort of associated with this harder policy platform that will end up turning off some of those switches that you're pointing to, those sort of disillusioned Conservative, Labour, none of the above voters who might otherwise be won over by a party that's critical of mass immigration, but not necessarily deportations.
No, I think you're right. And, it's Nigel's language, and many of the, Reform politicians in the past years, they've spoken about, actually, it's about control of migration. And I think that's broadly where the British public is. The British public do want to control migration more. That means making sure numbers are slightly reduced. And also, those who shouldn't be in Britain aren't here. Yeah. But that doesn't extend to, deporting those who are British and who they, share good ties with.
Thank you. Just briefly, Patrick, at the end, I mean, you've known Nigel Farage a long time. How do you see the spat with Rupert Lowe playing out over the next, month or two?
I think it's very dangerous. I think if Rupert Lowe and others like Ben Habib get this idea, let's set up a more pure party. If they got backing from Elon Musk, they could get 2 or 3% in the polls, and it would start fragmenting this critical mass that Nigel has put together since the election. And first past the post slaughters parties like that, and it would be the best gift the Tories or Labour had ever had.
Indeed. Well, watch this space, and we'll be watching it closely. Thank you to Chris and my panel. Now, after the break, the internet has exploded over recent days over the proportion of migrants occupying social housing in London. I'm going to talk to you about the stats in a second. It's not just London, though. It's also what's going on in specific parts of the country. You're going to want to stick around for this. I'll see you in a couple of minutes.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Patrick Christie's Tonight. Weekdays from 9 p.m.
You can smack, thwack, thump, and everyone's got a different definition of what it is.
I'm not an idiot.
Smacking
And most parents
is
aren't idiots. They can draw a distinction between those.
Lazy, shortcut parenting, and there's no case in which it's justified. Smacking spreads. So you smack one, they're going to smack their siblings. They're going to go into school and disagree with other children and give them a whack. And then what about, do you give proxy rights to teachers, nursery workers?
No.
No, you don't. So you love your child so much that you're going to smack them. Only you. It's special for you.
Hang on a minute, Anna May. Are you, just so we're clear, Anna May, are you accusing Bev of being a bad mother or something here?
I'm saying I can't believe that in 2025 somebody would come on TV and defend doing something to a child that wouldn't be acceptable to a
Bev,
dog.
do you want to come back to that?
If you smack a dog in the street, Bev, if you smack a dog in the street,
is almost every parent is smacking their child, except they won't admit it. And so what you've developed by that sort of parenting, it is true, is you've developed a culture of shame, whereby parents might have that instinct, as mammals will have, whether it's a monkey or a cat or a lion. In the natural world, the adult, the parent of that young cub, whatever it is, will occasionally...
What are we talking about here? What are we talking about this? Are we talking about hurting children with your hand and also not even having a standard? Paediatricians are saying don't do it. And also this argument, I know what's going to come next. You're going to say, oh, the police could be involved. Aren't they going to be too busy to do this? Guess what? Children can't dial 999, particularly the very young ones.
GB News, the People's Channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK.
We're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akweer, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to State of the Nation on GB News Tonight with me, Matt Goodwin. Now, yesterday, the Shadow Home Secretary, Chris Philp, shared the data on the proportion of London social housing that is occupied by people who were born outside of the UK. The answer, nearly 47%. Look at that map. But when you focus on specific areas in London and across the country, the situation is even more mind-boggling. Just a few stats for you. In Westminster, St George's, 72% of all social housing has gone to people who were not born in the UK. Harrow, Rayners Lane, 72%. Places like Brent, Northwick, 75%. Ealing, Southall East, 76%. Places like St Matthew's in Leicester, 80%. Unbelievable numbers. And I put those on X today. A lot more areas you can go and have a look at. So how did the UK become the social housing provider of the world? Well, with me now is former Conservative MP and London Minister Paul Scully, as well as my panel columnist and former MEP Patrick O'Flynn and former Labour advisor Paul Richards. Paul Scully, people are looking at these numbers and are thinking this is absolutely insane, that in some areas you've got 70, 80% of social housing going to people who are not born in the UK. They're going to be asking themselves the question, how on earth did we get to this point in the first place?
I think it's really difficult to unpick. It's not quite as clear, which is why X has exploded over the last day or so, because if you look at some of these people, they've been here for decades. I mean, my dad came from Burma in the 50s when he was, but he did okay for himself, so he's got his own place. But in the 70s and the like, you know, people were struggling to find work, and they often set up their own businesses. Why there's so many Indian, Pakistani, Bangladeshi people in particular in London that have got their own businesses, because they're not necessarily just entrepreneurial, but they were pushed into that for other reasons. But Chris has got a point, and we should be discussing it, even if you can argue over the
so we are discussing it. I mean, lots of people say we should be opposed to this, and we should have a principle of national preference in social housing.
Which I agree. I mean, you know, we have a lot of... It's overly complex, the social housing waiting list, because there are people that come, whether it's medical, whether it's other areas...
We used to prioritise British people and people of good character, and then we changed the criteria for social housing.
Which is actually what we should be looking at.
Right.
Is coming back to something like that.
OK.
Because otherwise people actually will then be waiting on a list. They think, right, I might have 5 years, which is still too long, 5 years to wait, and then suddenly a whole load of people will be, whether it's medical, whether it's people coming in from outside their area or indeed the country, and they will suddenly be waiting 10 years.
OK.
And so the social housing contract in many ways is broken, not just because of migration, but migration is obviously
exacerbating. I mean, we talked about this last week. There are areas of this country where you not only have 70, 80% of people in social housing who were born outside of the UK, but often of those people, only 30, 40% are working full-time. Large numbers of them are not identifying as British or English, and they're not speaking English within their households. Now,
I agree.
When I look at those areas, some of the areas I've mentioned, Leicester, Bradford, Oldham, it's very clear to me that the social contract, the social settlement, is not working on any level. So when are we going to get, you know, some action from Labour, the Conservatives, and saying, OK, firstly, we're going to keep social housing for people who have paid into the collective pot over generations. We're going to prioritise British people and their families. Or if you get social housing, the expectation is you work and you contribute and you pay taxes and you support others in a social settlement. We at least expect you to speak English at a minimum. And we also expect you to identify with our community, to identify with Britishness, Englishness. Why are people so scared to say these things?
Because of decades of people pushing against just even talking about immigration. You remember Michael Howard back in 2000, lead up to 2005. Are you thinking what I'm thinking? And people were saying, no, you're racist. Of course he wasn't racist. He was just talking about controlled migration, managed migration. He was talking about the difference between, you know, when you talk about multiculturalism, it can mean different things to different people. And I have no problem with London being a bit of a melting pot from people from around the world, as long as they realise, like in Paris, like in American cities, you become part of the fabric of that country. You become part of the fabric of that city, rather than just doing your own thing.
Well, Patrick, that's clearly not happening. I mean, there are parts of not just London, but parts of England and Wales as well, where people aren't identifying as part of the wider community. But this social housing point, there is something fundamentally unfair, isn't it? When people look at these maps and they say, well, hang on a minute, what about British kids who can't even get on the housing ladder?
Well, I see it as a grotesque betrayal of the British working class. Social housing, subsidised social housing, is a very scarce resource in our country. And the idea we are importing people to be dependent and somehow they're getting to the front of the queue. And as you said, the criteria for social housing got changed from kind of local connection and contribution to, quote, need. Back the left did this in the late 60s, but since the last 14 years, you know, it's all right for Chris Philp to complain now, but we've had the Conservatives in charge, allowing this situation to get worse and worse and worse. And I'll tell you one thing that disturbs me, which I haven't seen remarked upon, but I wrote about sometimes when I was on the Daily Express, is not just council housing, but social housing in terms of housing associations. There are such things as ethnic minority housing associations. You Google Somali Housing Association, Bengali Housing Association, they pop up. You try Googling White British Housing Association, doesn't exist. So the kind of racial activists in the big cities have got hold of the housing association channel to social housing. And it seems to me it's not just a sort of needs base where the migrant communities might have larger families. There's some active preference going on.
Yeah, I had a bloke in Sutton who was more than 2 years out of Sutton. He'd gone to Bromley, and then he was refused social housing. This was just an area. This wasn't even the country. Right. So if you've got that sort of broken system, it's hardly surprising.
So who
what you're
broke
saying.
the system? I mean, these are percentages, but they don't tell you how many actual social housing units there are. And you made that point, actually, how scarce it is. Why is it scarce? We haven't been building enough, and Mrs Thatcher sold off all the council houses. So the stock of these kinds of houses is small. It says 80%, but 80% of what? You know, most of it's gone into the private sector, where it's landlords.
But does it not trouble you that even though our housing stock in this country is pretty woeful, does it not bother you on any level that 75–80% of social housing in some of these areas is going to people not born in the UK?
Well, the history of this nation is people arriving here, speaking a different language for a bit, doing well, getting on, becoming middle class and moving out.
That's not happening, though, is it?
Well, it is, though, isn't it? Because a lot of those communities...
Is that happening among Somalis?
Well, it will do. It will do in 10 or 20 years.
Well,
Why? Look, I just spent the evening in Brick Lane last night. You know, it started off full of Huguenots, didn't it? And then Jewish people, and they all did well, and they all moved out, and now it's the Bengalis, and they'll do well, and they'll move out.
Diversity's always been part of our story.
Well, I think you're mixing up scale of migrations, the Huguenots and the Jews.
We were talking about Somalis.
Compared to the Bengali influx into East London, which has completely transformed the makeup of who gets social housing. You've got your old Cockney communities. Hang on, you've got your old Cockney communities who stared the Blitz in the face and were instrumental in defeating Adolf Hitler, and they've all moved out hugely to Kent and Essex. Now, some of them will have wanted to have done that, but others fell victim to the new rules on social housing, which saw Bengali families with larger numbers of children get preference over them despite their local connections. And I suspect, by the way, this can't be changed under the human rights regime.
Paul Scully, I mean, housing is going to remain a dominant issue in this country. Very briefly, what's the easiest, most straightforward way of fixing this or presenting some sort of alternative?
Well, first of all, Paul's right in terms of social supply. This is a supply issue
building,
at the first
isn't it?
build,
baby, build.
But also in London. In particular, you talked about those areas. I got in trouble for talking about no-go areas. I was talking about prejudice from outside. We have to get a better sense of people just becoming part of the wider community, not just their own community. And that partly is language, that's partly of education and tackling prejudice as well.
OK, well, thank you, Paul Scully. Now, in a moment, Donald Trump's tariffs have shaken the international order. But what does this mean for the UK? We're going to be talking about that with a top expert in just a couple of minutes. See you shortly.
Dinner under the stars tonight?
That reminds me of our travel insurance.
You mean all clear skies?
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News travel destinations forecast.
We have more unsettled weather to come across western parts of the Med through the next few days. There's some heavy, thundery rain pushing into parts of Portugal, including Madeira, also affecting Gibraltar, and heavy rain feeding into northern parts of Italy too. Further east, though, higher pressure here means it's that bit drier, and there'll be a good deal of sunshine too. We also have heat wave conditions building here. Temperatures for some will rise to around 5 to 15 degrees above average. See you later.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News travel destinations forecast.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more. Whether it's breaking royal news, Will, please bring us up to date, or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons.
Very, very curious.
We bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Britain's Newsroom, weekday mornings from 9:30.
Could Doctor Who be for the chop after more than 60 years? Well, here to explain why there's a lot of rumour, a buzz about this story is the GB News entertainment editor, Alex Davies. Alex, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
What on earth is going on?
Well, this has all sort of come around because the reports have emerged that the lead actor, Ncuti Gatwa, is planning on leaving. He's only been there for 2 years, but apparently he's already eyeing up the exit door. He wants to reportedly set up a new life in LA. He's got countless Hollywood opportunities lined up for him, according to reports. And the reports are also suggesting his team aren't too fond of some of the woke storylines that have emerged in the last few years. The series has come under fire a number of times. There's been several storylines that have been criticised for pushing certain narratives. They cast a black actor as Isaac Newton, for one. There are other examples, including misgendering aliens.
Do aliens have gender?
Well, you'd be surprised, apparently. There's one called a Meep that David Tennant, who briefly reprised his role before Ncuti, he got the Meep, their gender, wrong and was pulled up about it by a trans character.
Just very forced, it seems. Very forced. Oh, we need to get in the gender nouns and the pronouns. But there was also a bit of heat just for having a female doctor, wasn't there? Jodie Whittaker.
There was, but I feel like that's always going to get heat. When you take a fictional character, a fictional institution, which has been white men predominantly, and you put something that goes against that, you're going to get attention. This one in particular, like I say, with these sort of storylines, has garnered more attention than most.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Mornings don't have to be tiresome, especially if you have the right company.
Wake up to news as it happens, opinion and debate, and of course, a little bit of entertainment too.
Because when the kettle's on, we're on.
That's Breakfast on GB News, a show worth waking up for.
Every morning from 6 a.m.
Only on the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We'll spread the news, you spread the word.
Welcome back to State of the Nation Tonight with me, Matt Goodwin. Now, some of your views have been coming in. Tim says, remigration is starting to sound more and more like a necessary policy, isn't it? Rose says, British people can't even get a council house and they expect these people to fight for their country. Our young have been betrayed. Keep your views coming in at gbnews.com/your say or meet me on X at GoodwinMJ. Now, the UK has not been spared Donald Trump's tariff war, as the American president has slapped a 25% tariffs on all steel and aluminium exports to the US. Here is what Keir Starmer, our Labour Prime Minister, had to say on the issue at Prime Minister's Questions earlier today.
On the question of tariffs, obviously, like everybody else, I'm disappointed to see global tariffs in relation to steel and aluminium. But we will take a pragmatic approach. We are, as he knows, negotiating an economic deal which covers and will include tariffs if we succeed. But we will keep all options on the table.
Well, look, the British steel industry has been devastated by net zero policies, and this is the last thing that it needs at the moment. Now, with me now to discuss all of this is my top panel columnist and former MEP Patrick O'Flynn and former Labour advisor Paul Richards. Patrick, there is a new sheriff in town. The tariff war is with us. I mean, how is this going to play out in terms of UK communities, and in particular, some of those communities in Northern England that have been devastated in recent years by some of those net zero policies?
Well, I think it's a bit early to tell how the Trump tariff, aggressive tariff regime is going to affect Britain. We're kind of caught in general in this one. I don't think Trump hasn't really turned his guns on us, and I thought the Prime Minister gave quite a cautious, all options are on the table type response there. So it may be we avoid the worst of it that the EU does get. Now, I think that the traditional view from almost every party that's been in power across the Western world for 25 years is that global free trade is better for everyone. That misses out the distributional impacts. If you're a steel worker in South Wales and your steel plant turns down, you aren't necessarily going to be able to find the next best job that's almost as productive. You might be out of work for years at a time.
Yeah.
So if it's only the City of London and the financial services or other sort of trendy industries that end up with higher living standards as a result of global free trade, then I can see British people thinking, well, can't we have some tariffs on? Can't we have strategic industries? So I think there is potential for it to become a bit of a live talking point in domestic politics. But Starmer's pretty wise in actually just playing it cautious at the moment.
I remember The Economist in the late 1990s, early 2000s, Tony Blair and others saying that globalisation, free trade would lift all boats, would drive growth, there'd be no losers. Basically, if you didn't get on with globalisation, you were a closed-minded idiot. Now, Paul Richards, we now know that this actually didn't happen, that the working class in Western economies, like the Midwest in America, like left-behind regions in England, got absolutely smashed by a rampant free trade, and Trump is the revenge of the working class.
Well, and yet there were still plenty of cheaper goods in the shops, and we could buy clothes cheap and all the rest of it.
And a lot of people lost their jobs, and a lot of communities got smashed, let's be frank.
What's happening, I think, in the States is very instructive, because what it tells us is that populism is not the same as capitalism. A lot of those billionaire backers that supported Trump are now losing their money overnight as the stocks tumble, as the economy goes into recession in America. And look at the Tesla stocks, look at the sales of his car. The brand is being tainted, and I think those very rich interests in America, in particular, who are capitalists, are going to be looking at this guy and saying, "What the hell are you doing? You're destroying the American economy. You're wiping out all of our profits."
In fairness, what Trump would say is short-term pain for longer-term gain. That essentially the tariffs are about rebalancing a global economic order that had been rigged against America and in favour of other markets.
I've heard the argument, and he's calling it a transition, but I think it's going to be much worse than that. Now, when America catches a cold, or whatever that expression is, we all suffer as well, don't we? So I think that it will have a knock-on effect across Europe and the world until such point they realise that tariffs are not the answer, and free trade actually is a beneficial thing because it does do the things you describe. It does help people get cheaper goods. And I just think that...
But surely you've seen the evidence that Patrick was just alluding to. We know from serious economists, David Autor, David Dorn, people like that, that a lot of the jobs in the 90s and the 2000s, a lot of working class jobs, were basically reshored to developing countries like China. And also, many communities in Western economies didn't only lose jobs, but they had higher rates of drug abuse, alcohol abuse, marriages broke down.
Those terrible
things, jobs were redistributed to China and developing
Of course, I recognise those downsides, and I'm a Labour person. I understand that very deeply. But tariffs are not the answer to that. The answer to that is an active state that intervenes, that gives people new skills. It does things supports businesses to start up and creates growth in every part of the country. The kind of agenda that Rachel Reeves Reeves is talking about.
So, Patrick,
Slapping tariffs, not the answer.
All we need to fix this is Rachel from Accounts and an active state.
Well, I think Rachel from Accounts has probably got a good new alibi for why her magic growth isn't going to turn up anytime soon.
Not a £22 billion fiscal hole. Now it's Donald Trump's tariffs.
Rachel from Accounts is deeply misogynic nonsense, and you both know
it's
it.
Not misogynistic.
And second of all, I think if we're going to rearm Europe, then actually investment in the defence industries is going to help with economic growth, and that's not why we're doing it, but that is one of the knock-on effects, is that you will get growth in the economy.
I'm all for manufacturing, high-end manufacturing, but we need to sort out our energy costs, don't we, if we're going to become a manufacturing power again. And while you've got Ed Miliband tilting at windmills and playing his ukulele and looking like a student radical, that's not going to happen.
Defence industries then have all the supply chains and it's all in all the areas that you're talking about, which are the deindustrialised north. So we're going to get the growth, and it's going to be in every part of the UK. And by the next election, Labour will be able to say, we said we'd do it, and there it is.
I'd say we need more than defence. It needs to be other sectors in
I would say it would be the green economy too, but that's an argument we can have, isn't it?
And looking ahead at how this is going to play out, Trump's protectionism, I think sort of signals the death knell of that liberal kind of global order. There is a new sort of nation-first economics coming into the fore. And I guess the question that lots of viewers will be wondering is, what's our version of that? Where's the kind of Britain-first economics?
It's about Europe first. That's what's going to happen, is that we're going to lead within Europe, not the EU, but a stronger Europe defending its borders against the Russians. And
I would also say our options are much more constrained than America's, which has had a fast-growing economy, the dominant economy of the world, the only reserve currency of the world. It can do stuff. I suspect this will end quite soon, by the way, with Trump having got a series of slightly better deals for America.
I think he's doing deep damage to the American economy, and I think he'll be booted out on that basis.
Let's watch this play out. Thank you to my panel. And I should add, I'd have more patience for Rachel from Accounts if she didn't keep changing her LinkedIn profile, but that's just me. Now, in a moment, we'll be bringing you GB News' latest exclusive as our very own Stephen Edgington releases his brand new documentary, get this, on how kebab shops and halal butchers have sponsored hundreds of skilled visas. This is a scandal. You're going to want to check this out in a couple of minutes.
Evening. Welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. Temperatures are falling once more out there this evening. It's going to be another pretty chilly feeling day tomorrow. A few more wintry showers here and there, but also many places dry and bright thanks to this area of high pressure that's slowly edging in. But around that high pressure, the winds are coming down from the north, feeding in more showers across northeast England and down across the Pennines in particular. Some snow on the hills, more likely rain or hail at lower levels. And many southern and western areas staying dry. Where we've got clear skies, there'll be fairly widespread frost over southwest Scotland. The cloud helping to keep temperatures up a little bit for much of England and Wales, but still some frost likely in the countryside. Many areas across the south will see the showers fading this evening, and that'll lead to a dry start tomorrow. Quite cloudy, but some sunshine over South Wales and southwest England, where we've got these showers coming in across northern England. Potential for things to be a bit icy for the morning commute, so just bear that in mind. The showers feeding in close to the coast will be of rain, but inland some sleet and a bit of hill snow possible. Good part of Scotland starting dry, but it will be starting cold and frosty for many, but quite a bit of sunshine through the central belt and for Belfast too. We'll see some sunny spells for England and Wales, but generally the cloud increasing as we see more showers drifting south through the day, developing inland over northern England, the Midlands, even southern counties of England. Again, chiefly of rain, but some sleet and hail certainly possible, even at lower levels. Feeling cold, 6 to 7 Celsius. Add on that breeze on the east coast, feels even colder. Elsewhere, maybe 9 or 10. Friday is a similar day, so we start with frost where we've had the clear skies. Could again be quite icy in the morning as we see these showers then developing through the day. Again, chiefly of rain, but some sleet and hail is possible in places. Becoming largely dry though through the weekend with some sunny spells, but always staying on the chilly side. Bye for now.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody
in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
Welcome back, everybody, to State of the Nation with me, Matt Goodwin. Now, GB News' very own Stephen Edgington has released his latest investigation into the state of immigration in the UK, and the revelations are shocking. The film has revealed data from a Freedom of Information request. The film, by the way, I should add, features myself, so definitely check it out. And Stephen looked at these Freedom of Information requests that have been submitted by the Centre for Migration Control, which has been doing some truly excellent work on this issue in recent weeks and months. And they found several examples of halal and kebab shops in this country sponsoring dozens of skilled worker visas between 2021 and 2023. Here was a very interesting moment in this documentary when Steve asked someone on the streets of Bradford about this. Check it out.
Do you think the migrants who are coming to Bradford are skilled migrants?
I mean, you do have skilled migrants. You've got doctors and nurses who have come from Somalia. I mean, we can't say because they're black, they're not, you know, they're illegal or they're not bringing anything to the table. But across the board, you've got people who have got a lot to offer. Now, if the opportunities are there, then they can show us what they have to offer. I mean, I'm Bradfordian born and bred, and I look around and sometimes it hurts. There's just so many migrants. But if the kids are at school, they're studying, and if they're not standing on street corners begging, they've come here for a better life. If they come from war-torn countries and they've come here through the right channels, then why not?
Well, interesting stuff. I'm joined now by Rob Bates, a research director at the Centre for Migration Control, as well as my panel columnist and former MEP Patrick O'Flynn and former Labour advisor Paul Richards. Rob, every week brings another shocking discovery, and I should add, I'm a big fan of your Centre for Migration Control because you've been blowing the lid off with your Freedom of Information request. I do just want to ask you one question, though. Why do we need, and I hope you don't take this the wrong way, but why do we need people like you submitting FOIs? Why is the state and our established parties, why are they not telling us the truth about what's going on, including in these kebab and halal shops?
Well, I wish we didn't need the Centre for Migration Control because, to be honest, getting the information out is an incredibly frustrating affair. The Home Office, in particular, the Ministry of Justice as well, when it comes to issues around crime stats, are incredibly reluctant to release this information because I think once you begin to scratch beneath the surface, you start to realise that the sham that we've been sold for the last 10, 20 years, that mass migration is essential to keep the economy afloat and that the diversity which it brings is absolutely wonderful. You begin to realise that that is not actually the case. A lot of those individuals that are coming into the UK, as we've seen via this Freedom of Information request, are coming to work in takeaway roles, they're coming to work in barber shops, they're coming to work in kebab houses and curry houses, the kind of things that I think most reasonable-minded Brits would struggle to argue are essential for a proper functioning economy. And then, of course, there are the repercussions that come with the cultural impacts, as well as an increase in crime, as well as the recent statistics we've put out have shown.
Well, I mean, this is basically building a Deliveroo economy, isn't it? Lots of Deliveroo drivers, low-skill, low-wage migrants who are not really driving prosperity in the economy. Now, we're going to show you a clip from the documentary, Stephen Edgington interviewing an asylum seeker. Just check this out.
I'm from Ethiopia.
And what do you do here?
Actually, I'm seeking currently an asylum here, so I have been granted a refugee status. Yeah.
What do you do?
I used to work in hospitality industry, so I'm just looking for a job in hospitality and tourism.
And do you think that Britain and Bradford needs more immigration?
It depends. It depends, yeah.
What does it depend on?
Actually, like if they are like fearing of persecution and if they are like fearing discrimination and persecution, maybe, yeah.
Interesting stuff there. Let me just turn to my panel. Patrick O'Flynn, there is something fundamentally rotten at the heart of our immigration system, isn't there? What's going on in places like Bradford where as Rob Bates and his centre have shown, you know, halal and kebab shops are issuing these skilled visas, but they're not really skilled jobs at all.
No, they're not. And, you know, Keir Starmer would probably say this is the result of a one nation experiment in open borders by the last Conservative government. This is the Boris wave and the visa rules that Priti Patel and Boris Johnson devised. And it's an absolute disgrace. And it's one of the things that keeps dragging the Tories down from being able to be the semblance of a potential party of government. I'm waiting to see what Labour will do to really crystallise what a skilled worker is. What is a shortage of supply occupation? It seems to me that virtually any occupation on any wage level is just being used to funnel people into the country.
Well, what is a skilled worker, Paul?
Well, first of all, I'm going to defend the kebab industry, because that does actually bring millions into the economy. There's nothing more British than a kebab.
Yes. What we need on our high streets are more kebab shops, I'm convinced.
They are the last light on often in a high street. They're putting businesses into small places that don't have them. They create entry-level jobs for migrants, which is a good thing, because you're complaining about them not working. These are people working harder than any of us do. And people like it. They get the food to their door. And the only people that can complain about this are people who should never, ever have a curry, never, ever have a kebab, never, ever get a Deliveroo. And if that's you, you can complain. Otherwise, suck it up.
Rob Bates.
Well, I'm not sure we should be putting out a kind of grand scheme of what our economy needs to look like with kebab shops so that we can provide entry-level jobs to migrants. Sure, the whole point of an immigration system is that we're bringing the best and the brightest, and we're having to kind of create these...
But these are entrepreneurs. These are starting businesses
the
from
staff
nothing.
are working in kebab shops.
Some of them will go on to become members of the middle class with businesses.
Well, I mean, for that to be accomplishable, that would require a lot of training and a lot of resources to be invested in those individuals. The fact of the matter is that, as the OBR pointed out, low-wage, low-skilled migrants cost us over the course of their lifetime nearly £500,000
If you took those jobs out, who's going to do that job? Who's going to be on that bike delivering that food? Because I'm not going to do it. I don't want to do it.
How about 1 million young people in this country not in education, employment or training? Or how about the 3.3 million who are currently relying on welfare benefits?
Well, why aren't they doing it then?
Well, because there's no real incentive to go into work.
Picking the fruit and all the rest of it. You know, these are jobs that people want to do that are just arrived in this country. The people that live here don't want to do them.
The immigration system at the moment and the register of licensed sponsors makes it far too easy for businesses when they're starting to see a shortage of staff and they're starting to see that perhaps their top line is hurting, to just reach for that lever, pull that lever, and the government will bend over backwards to allow them to bring in individuals that are going to be earning tuppence with very low skills rather than actually having to bring in British workers.
Why don't we let market forces work like we're supposed to in almost any other part of the economy? And if you have a shortage of labour, then the market clearing rate price of labour goes up. I'd have thought, as a Labour Party person, you know, the trade unions should be saying this. You can just pull in, you know, migrants from low-wage developing economies, then you know, you're never going to get the higher rates of pay that will make people think, well, I'll go and do that then. And it's not just that British people don't want to do it. They don't want to do it at that rate of pay. And, you know, I can see their point.
Well, it's like social care, for example. I'm surprised that you're making this argument that you don't want to see people be paid more for their work. And instead, actually, what we're doing is we're making life very easy for big business, because we're saying, have all of the low-wage, low-skill migrants that you want, have an endless supply of cheap migrant labour, don't innovate, don't automate, don't become more dynamic, don't drive growth, which is also what you say you want as a Labour person. But at the same time, we're just flooding the economy with low-skill, low-wage migrants, which, as Rob Bates says, and the OBR, even the government agents, the OBR says, it's costing the taxpayer out there watching this show, it's costing them more than it is generating.
You were decrying Deliveroo just then, but that is an example of innovation, isn't it? That's a business that's grown through technology.
Well, let's see. Well, thank you to Rob Bates, the Centre for Migration Control, on my panel. Up next is Ben Leo, who's stepping in for Patrick Christis. Ben, what is on your show this evening, my friend?
Hello, Matt. Very quickly, I'd love you to ask Paul Richards what part of a kebab shop is British. But anyway, Nicola Sturgeon, she is finally resigning from politics next year. She won't return. What is her legacy? What do we remember her for? Is it the putting trans rapists in women's prisons? Is it the gender recognition bill? Who knows? We'll get stuck into that. Elsewhere, there was a bit of handbags outside Parliament today between two Brexit heavyweights, Lee Anderson and our good friend Steve Bray. There's a very funny video which I'll share with you. And elsewhere, a brave firefighter has been forced to give up the job she loves because she refused to bow down to the cult of gender ideology. All that plus much more in an action-packed show, Matt.
Well, he may be your friend, Steve Bray. He's certainly not my friend. Great stuff, Ben. That's all coming up after the weather. I'm going to be back tomorrow right here, State of the Nation at 8 p.m. on GB News. I'm Matt Goodwin. This has been State of the Nation. Thank you to my panel and my guests, and thank you to you, the forgotten majority, for tuning in. Stick around for Ben Leo.
Even though we'll see a cloudy start, it'll be a bright outlook for the rest of the day. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Evening. Welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. Temperatures are falling once more out there this evening. It's going to be another pretty chilly feeling day tomorrow. A few more wintry showers here and there, but also many places dry and bright thanks to this area of high pressure that's slowly edging in. But around that high pressure, the winds are coming down from the north, feeding in more showers across northeast England and down across the Pennines in particular. Some snow on the hills, more likely rain or hail at lower levels. And many southern and western areas staying dry. Where we've got clear skies, there'll be fairly widespread frost over southwest Scotland. The cloud helping to keep temperatures up a little bit for much of England and Wales, but still some frost likely in the countryside. Many areas across the south will see the showers fading this evening, and that'll lead to a dry start tomorrow. Quite cloudy, but some sunshine over South Wales and southwest England, where we've got these showers coming in across northern England. Potential for things to be a bit icy for the morning commute, so just bear that in mind. The showers feeding in close to the coast will be of rain, but inland some sleet and a bit of hill snow possible. Good part of Scotland starting dry, but it will be starting cold and frosty for many, but quite a bit of sunshine through the central belt and for Belfast too. We'll see some sunny spells for England and Wales, but generally the cloud increasing as we see more showers drifting south through the day, developing inland over northern England, the Midlands, even southern counties of England. Again, chiefly of rain, but some sleet and hail certainly possible, even at lower levels. Feeling cold, 6 to 7 Celsius out on that breeze on the east coast. Feels even colder elsewhere, maybe 9 or 10. Friday is a similar day, so we start with frost where we've had the clear skies. Could again be quite icy in the morning as we see these showers then developing through the day. Again, chiefly of rain, but some sleet and hail is possible in places. Becoming largely dry though through the weekend with some sunny spells, but always staying on the chilly side. Bye for now.
There will be a light breeze in the morning, leading to a warm front. Boxed heat pumps, sponsors of weather on GB News.
We want to spruce up your spring with an incredible £17,777 in tax-free cash that you can spend however you like. But that's not all, as you'll also receive not one, but 2 brand new designer watches and a fabulous Mulberry handbag. For a chance to win the cash, 2 watches and a designer bag, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus 1 standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. Call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge, or post your name and number to GB12 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 4th of April. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
Well, this is Chris.
This is
Biggins.
the Botticelli's Venus.
Well,
right?
this gets me incensed. This is unbelievable.
Right.
Woke union chiefs.
But there we are. There's the famous
have
painting.
said that this must be taken down.
The birth of Venus.
This must not be watched. You mustn't look at this.
And there's a trigger warning.
Trigger warning.
As well, right?
Yes.
And I don't know who's put the trigger warning on this. Is it the museum where it's held, or
Some union chiefs.
Oh, right.
Woke union chiefs. I mean, this is
so.
just...
What is the offence now with that? What?
You can see her belly button.
Oh.
And a little bit of her titties. I mean, it's a beautiful painting.
Yeah, the trigger warning is that this painting may involve nudity. Well, it is a Botticelli, it is Venus.
Yeah.
I mean, it's going to involve nudity.
And there are lots of wonderful paintings that involve nudity. You can't suddenly say now, in 25, you can't look at these.
You'd have to shut down every art gallery in the world.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, it would be ridiculous.
We are living in 1984 now, aren't we? I mean, not literally the year, but the whole censorship thing. It's like groupthink, you must do this, you must do that. You can't have independent thought.
Yeah.
You can't look at works of art in case you start thinking the wrong way.
It's just like newsflash, classical paintings will probably have nudity in them.
Yes.
You're right. Angling, and
And compared to what you can see on Instagram.
Well, yes.
GB News, the People's Channel.